Okay. Let's start looking at the material world. First, the rules. So it's a very dense thing of spiritual perception. Separative. Despite all of those limitations, like complexity, the body has many mysteries in study of all of their life, as physiologists, physicians. So because it is limited and because it is very solid and formal and capable of perception, doesn't necessarily that it's simple. The thing we also know about the material world is that it's the elementary experience of reality, and that all the limitations, all the drawbacks in the world are such that they are precisely what we need for getting experience. Because if you have too much available to you all at one time, it's too much. You can't learn what's more important or what's less important, what different factors are related to existence. But if you see just one thing at a time and it specializes, we do in the material world, one prepares us. We also saw that the limitation is so bizarre that we really don't know if the world is right. The same reality is portrayed differently because even our vehicles for experiencing the world are in themselves specialized. So it's such that if we look at an object as essence, nature is. There's touching may tell us, but on the other hand, hearing tell us not exactly what nature is. So there's two things in play. If it is all one reality, since we tell us consciousness the same reality, we should be able to look at a flower what it smells like. Reality, color, smells like. Smell of color, smell what its color is. If we can picking up our senses, probably be more to smell of color and smell what it sounds is. Be a very, very, very intense state of consciousness is more where we're going tonight. So we found out that the material world is insufficient in terms of reality because there was nothing, the combination of matter, we are able to differentiate the beings. Clear that all of the sentient beings, the living beings, have more complicated structures. If you look at it, recently killed flower has almost identical flower that a living flower has. One or dead or not. So we see that spiritual science, in order to understand it, and to look within appearances, to see the light, both the ability to have energy. And what we saw, looked through the eyes of the spiritual scientists, we saw that this world, all the living creatures that are in it, are permeated with the life essence, which is called third essence or vital essence. We saw that it was not only a matter of energy, not only a matter of life, but it was a transmitter of experience through light, the transmitter of experience through energy. The curious thing about it is that the energy and the medium of the energy are about the same thing, such that you don't see light, you see light that bears energy, and the two are inseparable. Finally, we saw that relative to the field light, which has as its basic nature limitation, and this etheric realm, and this light realm, was seemingly infinite, and that its definition came in relation to infinity. Actually, by the coincidence of projections of energies, energy is where matter came from. That matter was not produced light, because light actually produced matter. There are forms of any kind. But then, we look still further, and we said to ourselves, well, this case describes the objects of the world and the plants. It describes the living qualities, and it doesn't describe the fact that some of these beings are motivated to do things. It certainly doesn't describe our experience in that which is live the world and in that way, we realize that we have life needs. Life emotions, all kinds of experience, all kinds of motivation, conditions. And so we saw that the spiritual scientists have the world of emotion, the world of feeling, the world of desire is life, such that some objects in the room were motivated by a desire for something. A desire to escape, avoid other things. And we came to realize that there were laws about the nature of desire, feeling, such that that is loving, hope, sacrificing himself, attracts people to us. Also learned that by asserting self for the sake of self, tends to drive people away. And we learned that in order to completely understand this, we have to understand the witness. Since we're not clairvoyants, we have to try to feel what clairvoyance is like. It's sort of light. The witness quality is one way of being in a dark room. You can't see anything, and yet you sense that there is another person in the dark. It also has a feeling of memory, has a feeling of trying to remember something, or trying to figure something out. It's a beckoning quality of something meaningful that is within something else. It has that feeling, it's like it's on the tip of my tongue type of quality. And it has a quality of being self-replicative. This, there are things within things, such as light things, surprise package inside of a package, inside of another package. So there is a quality of like things seem to come out, burst out, in. It has a feeling, at the other end, a questioning type of feeling. It has a feeling like it was there all the time. I see it. Because once you get past the questioning stage, the knowing stage, it's always been there. And it also has a feeling that it's like the lifting of sorrow. Just not beginning to laugh, just really light. When it's light, discover something that is more meaningful.
also accompanied by the quality of wonderment. We can't discover something again without feeling a simple awe and a simple wonder about things. So if we put these all together, this is one more attribute here. That is the attribute of being able to see all sides at the same time. Again, it's like being at a pinnacle somewhere. You can see the entire landscape spinning really quickly, so that you see the whole landscape quickly, see the whole landscape all at the same time. And from without, it's like seeing it this one, all of those are impressions. And if you try to fuse them all together in your mind, or try to see them all as part of one experience, and have that anticipation, is what it is like to discover the spiritual world inside of it. It's an emotional state, it's an intuitive state, it's a spiritual state. You do discover something. It has that combined quality to it. So, when we found that emotion was not enough to describe all of our experience, because it's possible to live in our emotions, enjoy our emotions, and have a very fulfilling experience with them. But it isn't complete. There's something more. And the world that is within the world of emotion is a world of thought, a world of mind. That is to say that there is a thought behind every feeling, the same way that there is a feeling behind every action, and that there is life behind every form, and once that form precipitated. So we are much further back now in the chain of antecedents. We're back to a realm of meaning, of truth, such that the things that the feelings give to us, you might say, that the emotions provide to us, is the feel of what it's like to experience the inner truth, the creative thought that is behind it. Now, there is an illusion that is associated with the growth that we're going through, and that illusion has to do with the nature of experience. On one hand, our experience in the physical world, the ability to feel the microcosm of the body, is very highly involved. The body has so much wisdom built into it that no wonder I very much recommend moving forward in this state. It's an old book called The Story of a Living by Dr. Koepsel. It's meant for children between about the age of 11 and 15. But because it was written in the early part of the century, it would be frowned upon by modern students of physiology and grade school who also laugh at it. But it is one of the only books that I've ever read in my life where every page wondered. Every page was a gigantic discovery. And there is such a worship for attitude. It's not the deepest physiology in the world.
but his introduction to things in such a simple way, in such a way of appreciation of it all, that it's awe-inspiring. But the physical body, as well developed as it is, as much control as it has, because it deals with a lot of limitation, we tend to regret. That we know it all, and we understand this physical world, there's nothing to it. It's easily gotten forgotten, which I guess is sort of soundness. On the other hand, the further inward we turn, we come to worlds with less and less limitation, greater universality, and with wonderments that are astounding. And everything seems so simple because we don't have to deal with the turgid qualities, the resistible quality of resistance that we have in the physical. So the illusion comes up in the same way that we take the physical world for granted. The spiritual worlds, we feel we feel we know them more than we really do, and that just to experience them is to feel as though we're the gods and that we know-it-alls. And we want to be associated with all of that. So we disproportionately value those worlds because there's so many worlds of truth, and sparing the physical world seems to be a world of limitation. Whereas here, this is the only world right now where we can prove it to ourselves. This is the only world where we can really do much. It's very apparent to speak in terms of percentages, but relative to the physical world, there isn't much that comes in normal, natural, daily experience in the physical world. There are special states, 100 degrees and 1200 degrees above boiling, and those special states we couldn't live in, we couldn't experience them. But in the normal, natural things of the physical world, there isn't much we can't experience. On the other hand, relative to the desire world, the thought, and the theory world, our capabilities for experiencing them in full are very, very undeveloped. Only a very few percent of the total experience features of the worlds we get, but even that seems to be enough so that we can feel that we're great experts. Okay. Bearing all of this in mind, we will turn inward now, look just a little bit at the thought. We'll say very little about the concrete mind, which is a microcosmic vehicle that relates to the world of thought. We'll say that much later. This is an ambitious course. By the time you get done with this, you won't need another. Meaning you'll probably be done with life by the time you're done with it. Now, when we come to the world of thought, we're in a different world again. We realize that the empirical world is physical. Physical is somewhat subject to laws that govern physical, but that the desire world is totally different. That the conception and form or formation wasn't as important as intensity of feeling, or as the specific quality of feeling. When we come to the world of thought, we are again in a totally different world. And what applies to the physical etheric world and what applies to the desire world does not apply. some ways, some of the things that we discovered in mathematics classes or in symbolic logic classes have to do with the very simplest thoughts. But what we do in the realm of mathematics and philosophy is very, very, very small. Now, there's a curious thing. We talked about the physical world being the physical body of God was everywhere that there was a planet. And that we said that that planet, for example, had 7 states to it. First, there were basic solids, liquids, gases, waters, directly. And then we found that there were 4 ethers, each giving a different degree of life to the form, different degree of ability. But we said that there was a major difference between the realms that were more energetic versus the realms that are more formal. Solids, liquids, and gases produce definite forms. The air masses of definite forms. Compared to the light worlds everywhere, it can only be held by active concentration into a light form. There is a big difference. So there is a major difference between the concrete part of the physical world and the etheric part of it.
The desire world noted several different kinds of difficulties with the places where there was interest versus the never land where there is indifference, or parts of the desire world that were exclusively attraction with no repulsion, or parts where attraction dominated and the parts where repulsion dominated. So there are several ways that you can split the desire world, but none of the ways of splitting the desire world into any of its 7 layers produces the major split, like the split between the concrete physical versus the etheric physical. Now, a similar major split is the world of thought, such that if you have the physical world here, 4 ethers and 3 physical planes. And then we have the desire world, which is broken into 7 regions of desire. The world of thought is also broken into 7 regions. But the break is just the opposite. The major break is just the opposite in the thought than it is in the physical. The form, you may say, lowest regions are called the regions of thought. In them are thoughts, definite thoughts, thoughts that have meaning and an end. Succinct and complete along the way. The 3 higher regions of the world of thought, all the abstract thought, better and what we find there are not thoughts, thought of escape is a definite thought. Thought of avoid is a definite thought. Thought of an emotion of complacency is a definite thought. The idea is something personal.
that is very, very definite, very concrete. There are a number of ideas. There is an idea that roundness. You can see examples of roundness, but you can't see roundness. At least not a perceptual kind of round, not with a vision. There's an idea of containment. You stop for it, you might consider there is an idea of closure. So there is a thought that we take to thinking this last place. There is a thought that went behind this. In fact, that you complicated maybe several different kinds of thoughts that go into making our own thought of this. But there are ideas that are utilized in here, and those ideas are complete. Those ideas run universally. Now, this is a very, very big, huge distinction, because the ideas are universal. They don't need object to exist. They bear their own truth. And being universal, they have a quality that gives them a potential of infinite existence. Everything, this division in the world of thought, outward or downward, are called the phenomenal realms. Everything from that division upward are the transcendental realms. The phenomenal realms are like counting, and they're like geometrizing physical objects. Everything in the transcendental realms, the analogy that I'm using, is like working with infinities. You can manipulate them, and those infinite series, the ideas behind those infinite series, can fit each other. There are all kinds of calculations with infinities, and they're universal. You can't ever come to the end of them. In these realms, these are considered the spiritual, true spiritual realms, capital S. And in these realms, the quality is more material. Each has a specific purpose. So this focal point, this point between abstract ideation and concrete thinking, is extremely important. Next time we get the last part of the semester will also be the last part of what is an oral series. And such. But we're going to talk in the last part about our relationship with the spiritual realms then. So right now we're only going to discuss the phenomenal part, which is the concrete part. So there is a relationship that is analogous between the living part of the physical world projecting and condensing itself into the solids, solids, liquids, and gases, the more formal part that is found in the world of thought. because thoughts are produced from ideas. But the analogy also collapses back one level deeper than that, such that all of the more material realms, all of the phenomenal realms, are condensations of the spiritual realms, the divine realms, and the realms that are more of God. So, what we're saying in all of this is that the unity of the divine replicates itself through the whole scope of our existence, and that the old idea of whether reality is a monism or whether it is a dualism, the mind-body problem as it comes for academic philosophy, both of them are true. Like this has been argued by philosophers for a long time. Most spiritual philosophers, or most occult philosophers, which includes the inspiration, the source material for this book, focus on the dualism. What I'm trying to say, it's perfectly legitimate to say that the cosmos is all one thing. That thing is capable of one stuff or one spirit, but that is capable of many differentiations. And the consciousness or the law that is behind each of these differentiations is what determines what it is. It's very much like what the academic philosophers say is that matter is what obeys the laws of physics. Energy is what obeys the law of energy. You could say that thought is what obeys the law of thought. It's all one stuff that by imposing different laws, which are indeed different forms of consciousness, that one stuff takes on different grades. Because as we've seen, that there is a unity of stuff, such that if we're thinking about something in the external world, it is the same us that thinks a thought, and that thought has a feeling, and that feeling motivates us to act, and then action results in a consequence in the external world. There is a unity, a vertical unity that carries all the way through. That there's nothing lost. This would be proof to ourselves that there is a oneness that proceeds through all of these worlds and is sustained all the way through, and that's very important. For some people it is, because some people become more focused on the objects or the stuff of the experience, whether their mind exists or whether that stuff is out there. But that is also true from a spiritual point of view. There is a dualism. And this dualism is such that there are spiritual, with a capital S, worlds and phenomenal worlds. And that these two worlds are antithetical to each other, in that the major value of the spiritual worlds is universality, and the major value of the phenomenal worlds is limitation. And we run into people that are very set in this. Some people feel that the spiritual world must be the only world because they're universal. Why are we even fooling around with this other stuff? Whereas other people are so focused in the phenomenal realms, they say, well, this is here. This is reality. The other, because there's always an idea and always universal, it doesn't have that particular quality, that doesn't have any reality there. And so it is possible to have in ourselves a misapplication of the dualism between the transcendental realms and the phenomenal realms. spirituality both need each other. It's a strange way of saying it. Our sense of need doesn't quite convey it right. But roundness needs basis. Because if there's one thing that the transcendental worlds don't have, it is phenomena. Experiential phenomena where more reality can be brought to an idea by concretizing it in a way that there is a separate, unique experience of one facet of that idea. And on the other hand, we could look at this vase all day long and get nothing from it unless we had a transcendental understanding between it. So, what I'm saying is, spirit needs form for experience, and matter needs spirit for meaning. And this is one of the fundamental divisions of the entire cosmos. Now, when I'm addressing you as spiritual intelligences, I'm looking at bodies. That's just a bad habit. What I'm doing with my inner focus, with my eye of God, is I'm looking at spirit. There's a difference between the thoughts and the being that thinks those thoughts. One is a spiritual intelligence. And everything transcendental is a matter of understanding, knowing. It is a matter of spiritual intelligence. And everything in phenomenal rules is a matter, in some ways, of ignorance and resistance, as well as limitation. So the process of thinking is something that is under the control of the spiritual being, spiritual intelligence. In the same way that we saw that food had to have a motivation, and that behind the motivation there was a meaningful thought. Behind that is sensual knowing. It is a spiritual creativity, spiritual existence. This is what does the thinking. This is what perceives the external world. That exercises its control right at the boundary of the concrete world exclusively. The spiritual worlds, the spirit can never be made matter. Like the spirit itself can never be made to suffer illness, for example. But in not knowing how to create and utilize its microcosmic vehicles in the phenomenal world, it may make mistakes, and in those mistakes there might be a consequence of pain or suffering or illness or something like that. But that does nothing but awaken spiritual consciousness to a realization of the more phenomenal type of existence. It is true that our spiritual intelligence comes right into our bodies and through our bodies, and we can indeed experience out into the world of illusory phenomena in the material, but the real soul of this is removed way inward at the spiritual level. So everything in our antecedent chain of causes, that this cause this, the buck stops here at the division between the concrete and the ideation of the mind. Now this is extremely important. Extremely important. Knowing this, what the effect of this is really simple. It doesn't require any specific lessons of how to do it. Just knowing this one fact, that to control all of the things in the phenomenal world begins at the central region of the concrete mind. If we know that, one of the most fundamental principles of all mystery wisdom, all spiritual philosophy is, if you can control your thoughts, control everything else around. That is to say, if you make up your mind in a literal way, if you make up your mind such that you are going to be in control of your thoughts. It may take a while, it may take as much as several lifetimes, but once you, almost like a bulldog, grab on and take control of your mind, come whatever you want, control whatever you want, create whatever you want, and if you're going to nip the axes laid to the root, you're going to nip something in the bud, or if you better said, if you want to get in on the ground floor of creation, not have to start all over again because you find out, oh, I control this, but then you have to go to a level deeper. You have to get control of the thinking process controls all of our phenomenal experience. The second part of this is that the mind is creative force. It's a creative existence. A lot of people don't like reading. They don't like thinking. Because they think it is a dull, dead process. Just probably reading Socrates and Socrates. It's exciting. He doesn't even know where the argument is going as he's going through it, because it's exciting. It's following. It's let me see where my thoughts take me. It's arguing for something. Every time we think a thought, we're creating something. And there is no such thing as a dead thought. So this, in that twofold way, every thought that we have is in some way being thrown into a world of phenomena. And it's, if we can think at the truest level, highest level, if we can think thoughts there, clear, strong, true, we can inform the influence of the world, any kind of social organization, any kind of physical bombing, anything else. By thinking, we can affect much, much more than by ignoring them. And also, it's really important to realize ourselves not as full-hearted people. I guess what I'm trying to say in the other passage is, if we once realize that we are creative beings, then even the wholeheartedness of our lives become revived. One of the quickest ways for upholding spiritual self-consciousness is hard. I forget every day sometimes, seconds after I'm out of bed. But one of the quickest ways to uphold
thinking about everything that you're doing. Not letting the mind wander off by itself, desires carry itself, never land or something like that. But if you gain control, this is called creative living. If you're aware, this is one of the hardest things to me about maturing and growing up in life, is I begin to realize the consequences of my words. For one, you say something and then you come back later on, you really hurt somebody, you messed something up. And when you begin to understand the consequences of everything from how much toilet paper you use to if you start doing it, that is creative living. Let's talk a little bit now in detail about the rule of thought. The Austrian philosopher, either Austrian or German philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, I think was, in spite of his morally difficult life, understood Plato really well. Socrates was accused of being smugly cute. When they asked him what color was, and Socrates answered, color is that which accompanies form. And people who were willing to attack him, whatever he answered, they couldn't attack that. So they had to take him one step further in the argument. And they asked him, all right, what is form? His answer was, cutely enough, that which accompanies color. And like many other things in Socrates, it's something that you can pass over very easily. I don't think Ludwig Wittgenstein did. He pondered that. He pondered it very deeply. And he came to a realization that is exactly the same realization that spiritual philosophy, mystery wisdom teaches. He came to the conclusion that there were different kinds of experience that combined to produce given experiences. So he thought that there was a realm of forms. He thought that there was, he wouldn't use the word realm though, he would use the word set most likely. That there was a set of experience that was the set of form. And he thought there was another set that was a set of color, and that there was yet another set that was a set of tone. Such that if you had a bird singing, a bluebird singing, that would be a coincidence of those three sets. Because the bluebird would have a form, and it would also be drawing from the set of color, and it would also be drawing from the set of sound. And that each of those sets continued far beyond the coincidence in the bluebird, but yet they all contributed to the bluebird. For him, it was much more deeply complicated than that, because he was trying to solve it all in his mind. But it sounds exactly like modern mystery wisdom. Modern mystery wisdom says that the attribute or the experience of thought is a distinct, a concrete sense of knowing the truth. And that comes like the quality of pitch. So that if the physical etheric world is a world in which form is a
of ultimate importance. Even though there's color here and sound here, form is the most important thing. And in the desire world, color is not important if you're being attacked by a desire world entity, either in your dreams or wakingly. It's not important what its shape is. What its color is very important, because that indicates what its motivation is, what its feeling is. And what we're saying here is that in thought, the form of the thought is not important. Even the color of the thought, the sort of feel that it has to it, is not important. But the pitch is important. It's easy to see that there is an octave higher, like there are 12 colors in a color wheel, and there are 12 semitones in a scale. It's easy to see that antecedent to colors and desires, there is a set of thoughts and pitches. But the pitch is what is important. And this comes into all of our practical thought. We say, does it have the ring of truth? Because something has the ring of truth to it. Or we say, does that sound right? You know what I'm trying to say? That there is, some people are very good at double speaking. And they're very good at giving you pseudo-logical arguments. But it still doesn't sound right. You know what I'm trying to say? That it's a matter of sound. And we say that a person is even off key if they're not thinking true. And we say that somebody has a well-tuned mind. So it is a spectrum of pitches. Now, there's something of increasing quality as we proceed backward through the worlds, into the more spiritual worlds, in the same way that the etheric world was made up of life as well as a transmitter of life. Etheric forms are pretty distinct. But by the time get to the world of thought, the stuff of thought and the truth or meaning of thought become almost indistinguishable. That the forms become so subtle and so much approaching spirituality that it's harder to make the differentiation, so that there is a greater universality. Thoughts are shared by many people, especially the deeper the thought, the more it is shared with other minds, meaning minds of gods as well as human minds. And so there is that indistinguishable type of quality between the thought form and the truth that utilizes it. And the whole quality of thought becomes more and more and more subtle. And each thought has more universality in it. If we look at this box that we're recording on, that's roughly rectangular. And it's boundlessly rectangular. But the thoughts are so universal that within them they contain the essence of all the other thoughts. And the microcosm and the macrocosm are much more at one in the world of thought than in the concrete world. In the concrete world, we can see there's a big difference between an atom and the whole Earth. You can't do that in thinking. for the, I don't know how to say it, you can experience it. If you think one thought, like hearing one pitch, if you do that, you can hear an entire tone room. You can hear an entire scale. Because the bigger and the littler are one, are so close to one in the world of thought that it's indubitable. What I'm saying is, if you focus on one thought, or if you focus on one pitch, if you enter into concentration and focus on one pitch inside of yourself, I'm not talking about putting fork outside, but you can do that too, that's a little more dangerous. But if you focus on one pitch inside of yourself, what happens is that one pitch opens up into an entire scale. So that macrocosm and microcosm, but you'll hear the pitch, you'll hear the harmonics, the self-harmonics, and things like that, all up and down the line. It's also an interesting thing that with thinking, sound and silence are heard at the same time. Like when we talked about the forms or objects defining the entire universe, it was easy to understand where there was a manifest object in a part of the space that wasn't manifest in form. It's very hard to look at that and not see that. It's very hard to focus on all the space and see that. But in the world of thought, it's a very peculiar experience that when you're thinking, you're experiencing silence at the same time that you're experiencing the sound of thinking. I don't know how to say it, but they're there, that in the process of thinking, it graphically stands out of silence. It seems to come out of silence. And another quality about thinking that we're leading up to is that thoughts are complete. They're born whole. You can think a thought and you can experience the entirety of that thought. Like if you're making a form, you can make part of a form. But that is in itself a form, really. But when you think a thought, you can't think part of a thought. You know what I'm trying to say? Like thoughts are wholes. Even if the thought involves other thoughts. Now, history students have names for creative thoughts. Unfortunately, the names are used by other people in other ways. But a creative thought that is meant to produce and experience and travel the worlds is called archetype. Now, this is not like an archetype that is used in industry. Like right now, different kinds of molecules and crystals are being produced in space. And they become archetypes for reproducing them on this plane. That sense of the word archetype isn't what is meant. It isn't a miniature, or it isn't a seed of something that is bigger. But it is the source of everything that comes out of it. An archetype, whether it is the archetype for an entire life incarnation, or whether it is an archetype for a piece of sculpture, or for a hammer to make that sculpture, it is a creative thought form. But it isn't just a miniature, and it isn't just a seed. And then
Swiss psychologist Carl Jung also uses the word archetype. And he uses it much differently. Jung's archetypes are much more universal, and they are not as particular. Jung's archetypes are much more like universal ideas than they are like concrete thoughts. You can have, see, every life that we live is a specific archetype. Every object that we create is an archetype. It has an archetype behind it, one that finalizes it. For Jung, there are certain universal archetypes, and that we model our thoughts after them. And Jung's archetypes, even though they, trying to paraphrase very quickly what he says about doing justice to evil or to the differentiation in mystery wisdom, Jung's archetypes are more a matter of meaning and not so much a matter of direct interaction in a creative process. Whereas the archetypes, as seen in this matter of perception for mystery wisdom, are actually creative potencies. You cannot think about it having a effect. Each person or group of people that work on an archetype, because one person, this is a unique thing about thinking, that one person doesn't have the only creative thought. A number of people working together can work on the same archetype. It's a complex thought, and you might be working with angels and a few other human beings on creating an archetype of something that's going to come into manifestation, especially if you're doing something like lobbying a religion or something like that. It's something that everybody participates in. And the thought, see, the mind itself is made up of mind stuff, and they're inseparable, and therefore, anytime we create a thought, or anytime we compound that thought into a complex thought that we call an archetype, we do that via the agency of another thought form, which is where our mind really is. And so each of us, in ourself, when we're functioning in our mind, each of us has a pitch. The pitch is very much like our voice. Such that if you start reading people's minds, to some extent, it sounds like their voice, and it isn't sounding in the way that we listen with our ears. It's listening with an inner ear and not with an outer ear. And anything that someone has participated in or collaborated in enters into that thought form, and it becomes part of the pitch of it. There are really good examples, like if you listen to composers. You understand that anybody could write those same notes in those same forms. The person who actually took and wrote those pieces of music gave something to them that you don't hear in the notes themselves, but yet it's there. It is, you could say it's their style, but it is what it really is their pitch of thought. Or if you read various different writers, you're going to analyze the computer and say, well, they're more likely to use this word or that word or that word. But it's not the same thing as reading the writer and the writer having an archetypal way of thinking. And by archetypal, I mean they have their own mind that thinks that way. There's So you can always tell whether a thought is yours or whether you participated in the creation of it just by knowing your own pitch. If you know your own pitch, then you know whether you're thinking your own thoughts or whether you're being unduly influenced by other people. Okay, this is an awfully difficult thing. It's hard to work with. Now, the process of thinking is a process of evacuating. That thoughts, small or great, are empty, are hollow, are vacuous. And what happens is the stuff of creation fills into them. And when it fills in, that is how they become active forms, real forms. It all depends on how we think. Like what you might say is that the Spirit, us, in our innermost nature, when we are thinking as spiritual beings in space, we form a vacuum. And in that vacuum, the stuff is drawn that becomes an emotion, or that becomes an emotion and an activity. So the whole process of thinking is forming a vacuum in the stuff of space. Now that's kind of strange. It's it's like the contest of music. Pan, who was the nature god, played the Pan's pipes, which was basically an empty, vacuous flute. Whereas Apollo represented the spirit and played a lyre, and that was substantial and that sent vibrations out from itself. They had the contest of music, and Midas was to judge it, but because Midas was a stupid material man, so stupid that earlier he wanted his everything he touched to turn to gold, because he was so stupid, he chose Pan's music as being more beautiful than Apollo's music. And for that, Apollo gave him ass's ears. He could wear a turban around his head the rest of his life, cover up his ass's ears. And only his barber and barbers swore in silence, but he couldn't keep the secret anyway. He went down near the water, dug a hole in the ground, and whispered in it, Midas has ass's ears. And reeds grew up in that spot, and then they started blowing in the wind, and they started whispering in the wind, Midas has ass's ears. There are no secrets, but this is precisely what happens. I'll try to give you an analogy. The analogy will be very materialistic. If you're thinking, you precipitate a thought, and just let all the potential stuff of nature, the thought stuff, which is even more rare than desire stuff and more rare than physical and etheric stuff. It's very, in our experience of something that's phenomenal, thought stuff is the rarest. So if you think of how thin ether gas is compared to something like volcanic lava, many, many, many times more rare thought stuff is. And we permeate that thought stuff with our spiritual consciousness. But assume it's fluid, like water. And you're in this, you're in the water, but you're not the water. And that by precipitating a thought, that's like twanging
by an act of will. It's like twanging the string of the guitar. That produces, in the thought stuff, it produces like a whirlpool. That whirlpool becomes the archetype. And then, like, if whatever is in the stuff, gets hard and it reflects there, and if you ever notice using water, they become a collection of all kinds of debris. And that's the way creative thought works. However, that is a very gross external picture. The internal experience is different. Obviously, you're not thinking about hollows when you're thinking. There's one of three things that you do. One, you ask a question. And when you're questioning, especially like the ultimate, why is this like this? What you're doing with that questioning is like forming a hollow vortex. And then the truth comes into it and fills it. Or, another example is cogitating. You're drawing a focus together. The word cogitation means pull together. And finally, the best example of thinking, complete thinking in the concrete realm, is drawing together a meaning into a form. It's like questioning an image into existence. It's much healthier spiritually. It's much more complete to think in images, to think in concepts. And that's basically what you're doing when you're thinking. You're pulling something together. Therefore, if you know, this is why all of the people who have received enlightenment, like Oedipus, for example, it's a mystery for him. It's a mystery of Trinity. Father, Mother, and Son. Son slays Father, marries Mother. It's a Trinitarian study. He keeps asking the question, why? What is the mystery of man? He keeps asking and asking and asking. And in that triangle, he's putting up a vortex. Within a triangle, in that vortex, he's asking, what is the mystery of man? And when he does that, eventually he gets an answer. Man is who creates all of these problems, like in the basic, I don't want to go too much into the rule of the Sphinx. He comes to an answer, and the answer is of a spiritual nature, of a transcendent nature. He has produced a vacuum that has been filled by the Spirit, and then he sees himself as a transcendental being, and he blinds himself, meaning he closes himself off vision to the phenomenal worlds as the source of truth, and takes instead the transcendental truth. And he's made into an exile. He's no longer of this world. He's a pilgrim and an exile in it, and his real home is now his exile into a spiritual realm. Tragedies have deep meanings, very, very deep meanings behind them, more so than comedies, because the spiritual worlds, as understood in the Koepsel, this is the mirror image. This is the impression rather than the impressor. You see things backwards, and it seems to be very often not to say that there aren't real tragic things, but what often appear to be very sad tragedies have profound spiritual meanings. Obviously, the crucifixion of Christ is just that very thing. It seems like such a horrible thing. This very nice, perfect man filled with God. Why did he have to be murdered? Why couldn't he stay here and keep on giving us truth? If we look at it more deeply, we find out that it really wasn't such a bad thing at all. And look behind it, that it's a tremendously powerful meaning. Okay, so we have one very important understanding that by controlling our thoughts, we can eventually control anything. We can
essentially control just about everything. Because our thoughts then become thoughts of God. Now,
I want to mention some other kinds of thinking. Not all thinking is cogitation. Sometimes you just get on an intuitive roll. Sometimes there are intuitions that are going and going and going, and sort of thoughts just form themselves around the chain of intuitions. That's you're not really thinking in those circumstances. There are thoughts, like an intuition just comes shooting straight through you. Thoughts just sort of happen as backwashes, like if you pull an oar, like pulling an oar is the important thing, as a side effect, and having an intuitive stream of consciousness is something like that. Okay, now mystery wisdom, again, sees thinking as lower level activity. And that is that there is thinking about form, which is called this fourth region, the bottom seventh region of thought is called the continental region. It could very well, if we were thinking backwards, it could be called the atomic region. But when we're supposed to, the spirit, we think spiritually rather than materially, in an earthly way. We think of the continents, because from the viewpoint of the earth, the continents are, everything happens in spheres. It happens on the skin, on the outer skin. Most interaction, whether it's in a cell or whether it's in a potato, everything happens around the skin. And most of the activity, the evolution, at least as it relates to our evolution, we're talking about these things relative to human evolution, happens on the skin, in the continents. And the most concrete part of existence that we know of is this stuff. And so the continents are great big gigantic thoughts that include everything that's in them, all the forms that are in them. And as the continents change, which takes thousands and millions of years, because most thoughts last millions of years when they're thought. Even your naughty, bad thoughts are going to hang around for tens of thousands of years. Isn't that a nice constellation? That someday one of the gods will walk up to you and hand you a box and will be just buzzing with all of your naughty thoughts in it. Say, here, this is yours to handle. But everybody, all of the thinking beings that have anything to do with earthly existence, think in terms of the continent. But as a consequence, all of the atoms follow around. It's the way we should rule our lives also. It's like Plato says about healing. He says, all right, you've got a sore toe. You don't heal the toe, you heal the leg. You heal the whole body, and you heal the soul. Because you can't heal the toe without healing the whole leg and the whole body. So it's something like that. If you're going to do something, you propel your whole body to do it. You don't think about each individual atom. And in terms of the spirit, and in terms of our collective work and thinking, we think in terms of the whole continents. And that continental thinking is how we relate to shapes, substance, anything that has to do with the stuff of existence is what we relate to. We're thinking in the continental region of thoughts, the continental world of thought. That's all we do. All of the rest of the regions are currently inaccessible to us. Because in the same way
we're dimly aware of the possibilities of that. Just like last time we talked about feelings, emotions, and desires, we were aware that we were dimly colorful, like sort of gray, little patches of color here and there. But our lives are not really emotional, are not really feeling, and we have lots of color, and that's like listening to a wild romantic symphony or something like that, and it's filled with all sorts of color. Our lives are pretty blasé, because we really aren't very much awake in terms of desire. And the same thing is true in terms of thinking. We can only think one kind of thought, and that's going to form our forms. The next region is called the oceanic region. It's like the oceans, water, like the life ether. Life ether needs water to exist. And these are thoughts about life. Not saying like, oh, you're an old man, you think this way. Not life in that sense. But life about like this stuff is living. And this says that the potentiality is in us to think thoughts of life. And when we consciously think thoughts of life in a way that we think thoughts of form now, such that if we try to measure this room by principles of triangulation, we could figure out a way to measure exactly how many cubic inches are in this room. And they'll be able to tell us right away how much heat we need, how much insulation, and he'd have all the formulas right in his mind. But we can think, as soon as we think forms, we can consciously make forms. When we think life, we create life, or we bring life to make things living. The statement to this is that we have the potentiality in ourselves and in our destiny, in our future, to think life. That is, to take the forms that we now create out of the mineral matter and bring them to life. Of course, we're all copycats, because part of this thoughts, the world of thoughts is all filled with all kinds of thoughts. And most of our thought experience is trying to match up with the cosmic archetypes, because there are some that are made by gods, in that it's like see and copy. And that when we think like the gods think, is how we're going to think those thoughts that the gods perform, and when we kick them out or something like that, then we think those thoughts in our own manner. So quite a bit of the plan of God, you might say, something that we call the plan of evolution. There's indeed a creative plan. It's there in the thoughts already. It's all there. And much of what we're doing is not like following a recipe. It could be that simple, but it isn't, because we've chosen to be individual, we've chosen to sin, and we've chosen to create the recipe on our own. We throw a little spice, better probably, we throw a little salt in the recipe. So when we follow the recipe, we're going to talk about it much later on, about 2 or 3 years down the line. There are ways that you can bring your thoughts from form thoughts to life thoughts. The idea behind it is very simple. I don't want to go into it now, because what will happen is everybody will start thinking about doing all those things. All the powers that are before them, and they'll forget the one thought that I want everybody to remember tonight, and that is, if everybody can control thoughts, they control everything, they control everything in their life. The aerial region is next. And that's thinking thoughts about about emotion, feeling, desire. We pick up most of this stuff inductively now. It's sort of like the seed potential was spoken into us and it gets activated in us by the gods. We have the desire to participate and willfully ask to participate, and then the gods sort of by induction, like you can take a powerful magnet and you can bring magnetism into a bar of hard steel or hard iron, and that in turn can pick up something else. That's an inductive process. The property is not in the thing, but is induced from a higher source. And in the same way, our capability of even building a desire body or taking our emotions to ourselves is induced into us by the gods, according to how we allow experience to happen to us, because to a large extent we're very repulsive in our desire body and we refuse to feel our feelings even when we have to feel them in purgatory, unfilled. And most of our lives we're negating our experiences in terms of desires rather than actually living them and facing them and seeing that it's a bad after all. Okay, and those are thoughts about feelings and emotions. We're not ready for those yet. Finally, the last thought is in the region of archetypes. Now this is one of the most profound mysteries. This we could talk for hours and hours and hours about many of the ramifications of this. This is the most profound mystery. This is the basic mystery of creation itself, because it reflects, because it is right at the crux of the crux between the spiritual and the concrete. The spirit collapses into it, and the phenomenal collapses into it. What this says is these are thoughts about thought. But in the same way, the thoughts about form actually produce forms, and the thoughts about life actually produce life. And this says that in us, in the world of thought, potentiality, that if we turn inward enough in our thoughts, we can think about thoughts that think. In short, we can create beings that will think. Not in like artificial intelligence, computer, but it will be our truest test of understanding the truth, the divine creativity of God that resides in us. We can think thoughts about thought that will think for themselves. In short, we will be making beings. So that everything is created by thoughts, and thought is the center of all things. Microcosmically, we all have a mind. The mind is not the body. The mind is where we do the thinking in the world of thought. The brain is where we bring that thought into the neural perceptions and excitations in the physical body. The thoughts are thought in much. We could, without a brain, without a physical body at all, we could think. Without a desire body, we could think. The mind is our capability of thinking. It is our thinking. And it is the thoughts that we have been able to cogitate to ourselves. Because the mind itself is a thought. And our mind, which means our whole life, which exists long after the physical is gone, depends on how propelled the Lord, how deep we can make the world go. I'm sure everybody's road has tried to make those. That's precisely what we're doing. We're doing
our mind is a thought that we hold with us for a long, long period of time. And since light is what produces color, light is what is associated with the spiritual quality of truth that is seen as thought. That the relationship between word and light and color, as spoken of in the opening verses of John, are very, very deep, very, very profound, and are truth. So that to the degree that we think and that we hold the truth or create the truth in our thought nature, to that degree we have a microcosmic mind. And to some extent it is like light that surrounds within the desire aura, within the astral body. It is seen as a light. And to a certain extent, just by being able to perceive the inner eye or apperceive the inner eye, you can tell how bright somebody is. Our words in our language are true. How bright someone is how much light they bring, how much intelligence they bring. One thing yet that I want to mention, I'm getting a little tired here in 90 minutes, and that is, there is a correlative between exercise in the physical and exercise in all of the other spiritual bodies we're talking about. In the same way that we can, by exercise, we can bring our physical to a peak. If we overdo it, it becomes tiring. If we underdo it, we're out of key. In each of the spiritual worlds, it becomes more important. In the desire world, for example, unless we exercise our feelings, even if we do it just by listening to music or reading